Now it's my pleasure today to introduce Joanne Smith, back by popular demand. She's president of Price to Profits Consulting, author of several well-known pricing books, and has extensive experience working with some of the world's leading B2B organizations. So with that, Joanne, you've got control.
Well, thank you, Nick. So let's jump right on it. And let me start by saying, jumped one slide, 2 slides too much. My apologies, I'm backing up. We know that the future, of course, is quite uncertain. What's going to happen with the economy? There are so many moving parts, from the Ukraine war to climate change policies, inflation, supply chain challenges that are clearly affecting things. But if we look at, sorry, once again, we got a little over control going on with me. If we look at what I will tell you is the best economist that I know, that I've followed now for 20 years, Robert Fry, in his newsletter, he basically says the best leading indicator, which happens to be the 10-year Treasury note to the 3-month Treasury rate, is actually indicating we're going to hit a recession in the second half of this year. So many of you may have heard that from other sources. He, however, he looks at the preponderance of other indicators all collectively, believes that we're going to see that likely sooner, in other words, in the first half. So he does say, what's uncertain is when it's going to hit, but it will hit. We will see this recession. And of course, guys, just to put it in perspective, in his January letter, he talks about it's going to be probably very similar to the 1990-91 recession. Many of you may not even have been in the business world at that time, but about 8 months, mild to moderate, nothing like the very deep drop that happened in 2008 or the 2-month deep drop that happened when COVID hit. And of course, we also know that many of you will be absolutely affected in demand during this time, but others like semiconductor, or maybe you're in pharmaceutical, your demand may not be impacted. Maybe you're in construction and the infrastructure government bills will keep that demand high. So it's going to be very business specific. But given that, let me just ask you this question. We got a little time delay in that chart. Let me ask you to reflect on this question. I'm going to ask these 2 questions at the end of the presentation as well. See if you would answer them in the same way. So reflect back on last year and ask yourself, how confident are you that your business raised its price to its maximum fair and appropriate level over the last year, year and a half? And then how confident are you that going into 2023, your team is going to optimize price in a fair way, meaning increase when you still have the ability and slow the decline if that's the situation your business is in? How confident are you there? So keep those in mind, maybe write down what you say. So given this, I'm going to say, given the recession is coming, what I'd like to do is reflect back on last year and what a lot of companies did, so you can kind of look at that versus your own performance. Then we'll talk about, should you still be raising price going into this year? And ultimately, what are some of the strategies and tactics we need as our supplier pricing power tends to wean as we get towards a recession? So I'll start by saying over the last really 18 months or more, businesses, the far vast majority, had absolute fair and appropriate reasons for raising price. The rising costs that we know hit materials and labor and freight, number of other things. And a majority of companies also had a tight supply demand. Demand was growing at the time that supply was restricted, sometimes because of capacity, but quite often because of supply chain challenges or the inability to get labor. Both of those, cost and inflation, were reasons to raise price. So what actually happened? I'm going to just cite part of a survey that was shared in last month's Professional Pricing Society's conference. And this was of 3,000 companies. So in this survey, 52% and only 52% said they had planned increases for last year. Well, that means the large 48% probably had their business health fall because they probably should have and did not raise price. And then of those that were actually planning increases, typically 40% of inflationary costs were covered. In other words, they left money on the table and they hurt their business health because they weren't covering what was coming at them. Only 10% actually fully covered inflation and then some. Now, we know in a tight supply demand where the power sits so strongly with the supplier, we should be getting more price in tight markets because almost guaranteed when we hit weaker markets later this year, those buyers are certainly going to be using all their power to try and get our price back down. So if I were to grade that, I would say, in general, that's pretty weak performance. And I would further say it went from leadership, strategic, not setting the right strategies, all the way to our sales negotiation and their ability to execute whatever plans were put in place. So let me just contrast that with my clients for a minute. And I'll talk about here, this is roughly about 100 clients that I worked with last year. And the large majority of them came to me quite skeptical about their ability to raise price, or often raise price again, right? And the large majority of them only did 1 to 2 day training with me in an applied workshop where we learned how to better execute price increases. Now, a small amount asked for my help setting up what should their pricing strategy be, but most of them said, oh, we know what we want to do. Leadership's got the amount. Tell us how to go forward. And of those 100, what I basically felt was double-digit growth is what they were achieving in general, often multiple price increases a year. And by the way, many of these companies that I worked with are used to either one increase a year or often none. In fact, many of them, their whole business model was, oh, we need to decrease our price year after year. That's what our customers demand. So that was a learning curve for them. Extreme success. They had the confidence by the time we were done to really execute well, and virtually no or minimal share loss, volume loss across these varying companies. And many of them more than covered their inflation. They improved their contribution margin at the same time. I'll further say a number of them had contract restrictions that they thought limited them. And they learned as they worked with me that they were not as limited as they thought. So this is just a data point that says we can and should have done better than that survey of 3,000, right? Quite possible. So let me just speak to a little bit of the buyer reactions that many of my clients certainly received last year. And as a general rule, buyers were almost numb to increases. On like a daily basis, one supplier after another was raising price at them. So I actually saw reactions that went literally from a thank you note to the supplier. Thank you for that price increase. I'll update my system. Now, thank you notes were a little rare, but there. What I generally saw far, far more frequently across businesses was the acceptance of increase, but the pushback that says, please let this be the last one this year, or at least give me a heads up if you're coming out with another increase. Now, there were a few buyers who did the bully tactics, tried to scare the salespeople, and literally I saw one that absolutely said, how can you sleep at night? Literally trying to shame the salesperson into backing down. Or what the more typical kind of bullying tactic was, well, if you insist, we will stop buying immediately. And in general, what happened after those conversations? Within minutes, within the hour, those customers were placing orders. So that's what we were basically saying. And I would just say, as we looked at last year for sure, and I believe many of you are still in this case today, that window, that opportunity to move price was as good as I have seen it, perhaps in my 20 plus years of doing pricing. We had fair rationale that we deserved. If we didn't do it, we were hurting our business health. And for many of us, very low share risk, because one, competitors had the same reason to move, and two, there was a scarcity of product often. So great positioning. But I would further say, right, for many of us, that window is going to start to close. A couple months, 6 months, not sure, but it's going to start to close somewhat, potentially a lot, who knows. So my point, of course, being, if you deserve an increase, boy, move it on the sooner side when the dynamics are in your favor. Do not wait to the second half when probably you will be far less successful. All right. So if we're going to move price, we have to have confidence. We have to have conviction. We have to have courage to be really successful. And I contend that comes in 3 ways. We all have to believe that the price or the price increase or whatever our price is fair and appropriate, that we deserve that, right? That's got to be a cornerstone. Then we have to have the skills, leadership right in through our sales, to be able to execute in a way that the marketplace feels it as fair and appropriate. And leadership is got to have the backs of the salespeople. We can't leave them out to dry there. If we're going to take the risk of going to our highest fair price, that puts a little more volume risk on sales. And I would tell you that leadership is so critically important, because really strong leadership can actually overcome a bit of weak skill in our sales teams. Conversely, weak leadership can really undermine some very skilled price negotiators. So I'm going to start here and just talk to leadership. And I'm going to really make 2 key points that leaders have got to be thinking about throughout the year, right? Whatever your strategy is, the most effective businesses are when the leaders through sales are willing to risk some volume, right? If you're unwilling to risk volume, guaranteed you will be less successful. You won't be pushing the envelope. You're not going to have quite the results. And you have to set that up as a culture so that your sales team genuinely believe that that's where you are at, right? That is an acceptable place. In fact, if I look back at like my 20 years, if I were to do the statistics on willingness to risk volume and actual loss of volume, I would contend that there's a reverse correlation, which probably a fairly high R squared if I actually had done the statistics here. Meaning, the more willing you are to risk volume, the less likely you are to risk it. The integrity that comes forward from knowing your value, knowing your price point and its fairness, actually engenders trust into the marketplace that helps with customers and competitors being less aggressive, if you will. Now, beyond that, the second thing I would say to leaders is you've got to set your pricing strategy. And it might be strategies, because if your business has gone from very favorable to less favorable times, you're going to need to update that strategy as we go through here. And so I want to just kind of take this and contrast it with a beautiful poem by Dylan Thomas. And it's "Do Not Go Gently Into That Good Night." It's actually based on aging. And really just to kind of own up to it, where did I hear this poem? Years ago in a Roger Dangerfield movie. However, let's look at that first line. Do not go gently into that good night. I would say to leaders, do not go gently into that recession. And the third line, rage, rage against the dying of the light. And I would say rage, rage against the weakening of your pricing power. In other words, don't be a victim, right? Get out ahead of what's coming, proactively set your proper strategy so that you're going to do well here. I guarantee if you do not do this and communicate it very well to your sales team, you will unintentionally cause your market price to drop faster and deeper than it need be. So pretty critical. All right. So if you're going to do this, you got to do it based on fair rationale. So let me turn to what fair pricing might be. And I'm going to give you a couple thoughts in this area. So let me show you this, what would be an appropriate chart for 2022. And for some of you in this first quarter, first half of the year may be still in this position. Using a waterfall chart to illustrate, if I look at that left-hand bar, let's say that was your end of year 2021 rate price. And all these blue dots or buckets are an illustration of rising costs that you should fairly be able to cover. And those are fairly quantitative. What's my raw materials, my labor, etc. The green bar is if you are tight supply and demand, more qualitative of what is an appropriate increase for that, getting us to the new price. And you'll notice all those pieces are all positive, all the power in your hands as suppliers, all the reason to fairly and boldly raise price. But at some point this year, some of you are actually probably expecting that raw materials, perhaps a key raw material might come down, and you're going to get price pressure to give that back to your customer, if you will. So a couple points I would make. Clients I'm working with that tell me, oh yeah, our price this year, our raw materials, it's down. And I always say, is it down already? Or are you just projecting it's going to be down? And normally as I talk them through it, they're like, well, it's not really down yet. It's just supposed to go down. Well, let's not overreact to something that hasn't yet occurred. But assuming it does drop, you still have, that might be a negative in your thought process, but you have other reasons where other costs are probably still rising, or your supply demand is still tight. So still a reason for fair increase if this is where you are at some point this year. Others of you might be hitting inflation and it's not stopping. Maybe it's not quite as fast, but it's still there. But you're starting to feel the slowing of the market. Demand will start to drop at some point. So you have less pricing power, but you didn't give it all up. You still have rising inflation. So we got to look at the net of those things, positive to pricing power and negative. And I would say both of these waterfall drawings would illustrate the ability to moderately raise price. Maybe not boldly, but moderately. So as you think about your strategy this year, you are likely to be going from some ability to boldly move price. Many of you are still there, into where it's more moderate, is more appropriate. And some of you, and I would say residential housing, are maybe already in this, right? They are kind of leading edge and hitting that for months now, that decline. They may be more into a strategy of how do I slow the decline and make it not as deep? And that's going to be pretty important. There's certainly rationale there. Many of you probably still, once that demand falls, you'll have some expensive inventory that you have to move through. Many of you did not capture increases that hit you right away. It might have taken you months before you move those price increases along. Better take you months before you go and give it back if that's the appropriate move. So we're going to go through that. And let me just go forward. Some of the things that I think about when I think about those kind of waterfalls and building them up in my mind is I will often not just look at the current year. I'm going to look back at 3 to 5 years because I'm looking for any fair rationale that says my industry, my company, my industry, we still deserve more. Maybe we had seen declining margins for 3 or 5 years that we haven't fully recovered, or we've had very weak price increases over the last 3 to 5 years. Other than that, even if I can't move broadly, I'm going to still look at low priced accounts, low volume products. I'm going to look at my business health, my industry's business health. Are we really getting the margins we need, the return on that investment, so that we can continue to innovate in our value or in our manufacturing capability so that we can serve our customers well into the future? So I'll look for areas there that can help me justify increases. And for sure, if I'm in a tight market demand, I'm going to go a little higher, right? I am going to do a customer mix enrich. I'm going to sell to those customers willing to pay me fairly and allow some of those bottom feeders, if you will, price buyers, to walk away if they want. All right. So we get that in mind. That's our fairness rationale. It's not the only thing that we need to think about if we decide, should we go up in price, down in price, hold price? That's just one of a couple of things we need to think about. And by the way, I might just comment, most companies, when they do that fairness rationale, they go too low. And I know this because so many of my clients that come into my training workshops with one idea on what they're going to do, and they're just trying to execute well, before they're done, they increase what they're doing because they didn't necessarily fully realize what would be more fair and appropriate for them. But let's say we have that. We also need to understand how our competitors are going to act. And I'll talk about that in skill, because competitors are absolutely influenced by us. So we can potentially influence how they're going to act. And we certainly better be thinking about our price volume trade-off. How much share could we lose? Does it make sense? Does it help our profit or not help our profit? It's when we put all three of those in play, in context of whatever our contract restrictions allow, that we can set good strategy. And I've already mentioned, and don't have time to get into, but there are contract restrictions, sometimes that you think are restrictions that may not be. So challenge yourself in that light. All right, so just say a word here about price volume trade-off. This is a fairly experienced group, so you probably already recognize that pricing is far more powerful at bringing in profit than volume. So as an example, if we raise price 10% proactively, if we have very low margin business, maybe I'm going to compare 20% contribution margins that might be more indicative of more of a distributor model, although distributor models often go quite a bit higher than that as well. They could literally afford to lose 1/3 of their business and not have hurt profit. In other words, they go up 10%. If they lose less than 1/3, they made money for the company. More of you are probably closer in the 50% contribution range, maybe a combination of unique products and some undifferentiated. You could still afford to lose 18%. That's your break even. What are the odds that you would lose that much share? Probably pretty slim. So price is at least twice as powerful. But let's really be clear that if we proactively drop price, and by the way, when I say proactively, it might actually be unintentionally. Like your leaders are like, no, we're not dropping price. And your salespeople are like, oh, we're in a recession. Demand's down. I better drop price. It may happen without your necessarily setting it. But if we discount 10%, boy, we had better gain a full doubling of our business if we have really low margin. And in the 50% contribution margin area, we'd still have to gain 25% volume increase. Almost impossible in good markets, let alone in recessionary compressed markets. So clearly a hard way to try and make money. Rarely does the dropping of price to gain share help you out. So we're putting all this in context. We use it to set what is our fair price. And again, that price strategy you need to continue to update, right? Because it should potentially have to change as some of those dynamics change. So I would just say to you, I'm hoping that each of you have a short list of leading indicators, 4 to 6, that you are looking at constantly. And I would say at minimum, once a month in your business team meetings, take a 5-minute pulse check, put up whatever is your unique 4 to 6 leading indicators of whether you have pricing power or you have lost it. And we can do this as simply as a thumbs up, thumbs down, neutral. What of these dynamics are changing, if any? And if any are changing, you have to ask yourself, does that give us more or less pricing power? Does it mean we have to change strategy? And of course, if we do, we got to communicate that to our sales folks. They got to be fully informed if we're going to expect them to be able to counter any pressures they're getting from customers. My leading indicators, these are just examples. You can use your cost or maybe index prices of a key raw material. You could use a macroeconomic indicator. You could use supply demand, very qualitative, but we can certainly get a sense on whether we feel it's a tight market, balanced or loose. Competitive activity, are we seeing more and more activity that's raising price or more and more discounting? Your share percent, again, qualitative. Do we think we're losing share, gaining share? Inventory, we can quantify that. Is it starting to rise, giving us an indication of softer markets? You pick what's right for you. Keep your eye on it. Change your strategy if needed. And this brings us to skill, right? We need to have that price fair, leadership behind us. We need the skill. And so when we think about our execution success, there are 4 forces always interacting on each other. And the very bottom one is market dynamics that have been very positive for suppliers and will start to be less positive for many of us before year's out. So we'll change strategy there. But how our customers behave and our competitors affect how we behave, affect our confidence. The good news is how we behave affects them. And we got to be very conscious of the right behaviors so that we keep trust in the marketplace, minimize aggressiveness, right? Because when you go into recession, it's a slippery slope to losing power across your industry. So our behaviors become even more critical. And I will just share why that is by using the butterfly effect as an example. And many of you probably have heard of the butterfly effect. It's used sometimes in even children's books. It comes from chaos theory. And it basically goes that if a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, some little movement, it can set off ripples that cause one action upon another action, and can result in a tornado in Texas. So chaos theory basically says things that are not controlled, left to nature, left to their own devices, will deteriorate. And that's the truth in our pricing world. In our pricing world, every deal we do is the butterfly flapping its wings. It can set off ripples that can unintentionally hurt our pricing power. Example, you get one of your salespeople, and maybe just one, and they over discounted a large customer. That customer makes sure your competitors know that you're actually discounting. Now it just takes 1 or 2 salespeople at one of those competitors. They get scared. They drop price. Those customers make sure you hear about it. Now more of your salespeople start to drop price when they hear competitors are dropping price. And there's how we get that price war accidentally, unintentionally happening. The good news, guys, of course, is this can work in reverse. We can put in that leadership, that training, that skill, so that if we use the right behaviors, that butterfly flapping its wings is actually going to help us have a more trust, more appropriate market, so we get our highest fair price. We create something like the snowman, building a snowman in Texas. So that's what we're going to need, that skill to be able to do, and it can very well and effectively be done. So I'm going to give you one example that I think is a great one in this area. Last year, beginning of the year, I was working with a client in the construction space that across the globe had absolute fair reason to raise price. Absolute fair reason. 3 of their regions, North America, then South America, then the Asia region, all did training with me, roughly 2-day workshop. Some of them virtually, some of them face-to-face. One region, in the European region, elected not to do the skill that they felt comfortable they would do the increase without that. What was the results? Virtually no or minimal share loss in these 3 regions that did skill training. 30% share loss in the European market, even though they had a fair rationale for raising. All right. Just an illustration of how that skill set is so darn important in our confidence, in our courage, and in ways so that we absolutely get our customers accepting that as a fair increase and doing things in ways that don't engender aggressive competitive moves. All right. So as I think about this skill set, what I'll say to you further is I have surveyed tens of thousands of salespeople whenever I'm doing training inside companies. And I always ask the sales, how would you rate your skills in price negotiations? And by the way, guys, I am typically working with quite senior salespeople, right? 10, 15, 20 years, sales managers, marketing people. 90% rate their price negotiation skills as mediocre at best, right? And that's during normal times. How do you think they would rate if I said, what's your price negotiation skills in times of recession? I suspect that would go up even higher. So those folks recognize the need, and we can make huge change. We can get the whole team aligned on something. We can do it. I prefer to train and apply it to your business. So you're coming out with your talking points, your rationale, your share loss potential assessment, your tough questions and how to answer it. Those sort of things can be very critical. A lot of my clients, right, last year they were doing this on help me raise price. Those same clients are now saying, let's do this workshop, but let's do it from how do we deal with a recession? How do we do some tactics that might be slightly different in these tougher times? So I'm going to leave you with a couple thoughts. One, I believe the window of time to raise price is, for most of us now, it is still here. It will be closing. Get ahead of it if appropriate in your business. Really work on the skill set, assess, and I have several books that can help with skill set, or maybe you do training, but work on that if that skill set is not there. And then lastly, as I said, monthly, keep your leading indicators out there. Change your strategy as it goes through the year. Keep your sales team fully appraised so that they are as well positioned to counter customer arguments, if you will. All right, I go back to that chart I showed us in the beginning. Having heard what you've heard, the 2 questions. 1, rate yourself again. Are you confident that over the last 2 years, your team actually did raise price at its fair and appropriate level? And 2, how confident are you that they will do they or you will do a good job moving price to its highest appropriate point, whatever that might be through the year? And think about it strategically, your leadership capability to set those strategies, your ability to execute, which is part leaders, mostly sales. So with that, Nick, I will turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, Joanne. And I do say as a New Englander, I appreciate the association with the positive outcome with the snowman. But that aside, thank you so much for the great presentation. We've had a bunch of questions come in during the session, and we're gonna give everyone a little bit more time to enter them. As a reminder, enter a question, you'll be entered to win, and take the survey at the end of the webinar, you'll be entered to win a copy of one of Joanne's books that she mentioned during the webinar, the Pricing and the Crisis Playbook. So while everyone is entering their questions, I'm going to bring on board Brian Hannon, who is VP of Sales at Leverage Point. And he's going to show how we at Leverage Point help B2B teams implement those pricing strategies and put them into action in a sales context. So with that, Brian, take it away. And I can't hear you, Brian. Brian, you might want to just check your audio real quick. Maybe the headset issue.
You might be doing this.
Okay. He's going to go on mute. He's going to mute. Brian, I'm going to skip ahead to Lynn's section right now, and if you don't mind, just you can dial on in, and I'll cut back to you right after this, if that's okay. And we can get the audio sorted. So apologies for the confusion. So we have one other special guest star here, Lynn Yanyo, who is Executive Director at the ISBM, is here to tell a little bit more about what they do. So Lynn, if you'd like to just chime in here, that'd be awesome.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to do that. And you can throw up that one slide if you have it, Nick. So really glad to be able to join you guys, and always love hearing from Joanne. She's one of our favorite trainers, and she's done, I don't know, lost count of the number of our members who have had Joanne come in. And not only do you learn the basics of how to get your value out, but I think the best thing that Joanne has ever done for especially teams I know is to give everybody confidence. And if you can go in there confidently and argue, you can get back what you are deserved. So go Joanne. So we're the Institute for the Study of Business Markets. Thanks for the slide. We are 40 years old this year. And so we were founded at Penn State back in the 80s, solely to do research in B2B marketing, because at the time there was no one doing that. And even today, there's relatively little work that's done in the B2B space. We're the only institute that operates as a not-for-profit. All of the funds that we generate from the institute, that is from our membership and the work that we do, goes back to fund research in B2B marketing. And you can find us at isbm.com and at isbm.org. The org site is the research site, and the .com site is where our members exist. We have a bunch of things that are coming up too, and so thank you, Nick, for the opportunity to just do a little pitch for the stuff that you can come and see from us. So on February 23rd, we have early stage ideation and rapid opportunity discovery. It's a very similar idea with a company that has developed a really great technology for getting ideas and testing them before you go to market. And then we begin our educational programs too. We have a course on B2B storytelling. So if you don't think you're a great writer, you can be, because there's actually a process you can follow to do that. And that starts in March. And then we offer a mastery track with the best of all of our offerings together in a 6-month period, where you can go from zero in terms of B2B marketing and be capable of doing what you need to. Then we have a few more webinars coming in. One of our past fellows has written a book. We hope you'll join us for that and learn about that. And you can see everything on our site at isbm.com. Thanks for that opportunity, Nick.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, I encourage everyone to check out that site, and we'll actually be sending out a link to that in our follow-up email. So it looks like we're still waiting for Brian to come back on board. So if we have time, we can go through with the demo when he is ready. But I think no better time than now to start the Q&A. So Joanne, does that work for you?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. So we got a bunch of questions that came in. I'm sifting through them now, but I think a good one just to kick things off would be if you have a unique or high value product where price is set based on value, not cost, how do you think they companies should price that,
Yeah,
especially in inflationary times?
right. It's a great question here, because so frequently I see the misconception of folks with really unique products. Oh, we are value priced. Therefore, only commodities raise price because their cost is going up or their market tightness. And I would suggest, boy, you are leaving money on the table if that is your approach. Because why? When we do value pricing, we are doing it next to whatever are those alternative products, probably more undifferentiated, maybe some of them even not in kind commodities. And my guess is during this time, those alternatives are raising their price. If you don't keep your premium that you clearly deserve over and above them. And further, because you are potentially the value leader in some of these areas, you almost set the stage. You make it tougher for your entire market to raise if you as the value leader aren't moving. So I would absolutely rethink that and take advantage of the ability to maybe reset your entire market while maintaining that fair premium.
Great. So I think we have a couple that are, I'll group these together, that are on competitive behavior. So one is probably good, an illustrative example, but how do you support the price increase if the cost of your competitors keeps lower than your prices? So this kind of harkens back to that arrow chart that you showed.
Did you mean your competitors are lower cost or lower priced?
So how do you support a price increase if the cost of your competitors keeps lower than your prices?
Yeah, I'm suspecting they actually mean price. So it's not unusual for some of our competitors to price less than us, particularly if we have higher value. They deserve to have a lesser price. The point is, does the market suggest that both of you or all of you should be at yet a different level? Are you all having rationale that you should move up? And your behaviors, if we do things like we communicate very well and clearly that we're raising price. Of course, nobody follows it if they don't know. Everybody's looking for somebody to kind of lead that off, right? And so that they can follow underneath. So we have to be able to do that in a way that communicates well. We absolutely have to do what we say, right? If we want to be trusted with integrity, we can't go saying we're raising price and then as soon as we get a big customer that's bullying us, we get scared and back off. Those sort of things will give ammunition to our customers to go whisper to our competitors how we're not really raising price, and they undermine us. And of course, there's some tactics I can't even go into here that if you have really aggressive competitors, what can we do to maybe minimize it? And what we surely are not going to want to do is we have a competitor just cherry picking our share. If we want to sit by and ignore it and take no action, boy, that's just like telling them, go ahead and keep doing it, because they will, like taking candy from a baby. So we need to have some counter moves if we are having our share aggressively attacked by a competitor.
Makes sense. Oh, here's a good one. It's on staggering and frequency. So in terms of scheduling price ups, how to define the frequency so you don't have them too often, but also compensate for the cost increase on time? So like, how would you schedule these price increases? Any general guidance?
Yeah, and that has been probably the most difficult thing over the last year and a half, because many of us thought we were doing the right increase, and then boom, we get surprised by more and more inflationary cost. And then we have to move back out. So to the extent we have a good crystal ball, which we rarely do, but to the extent we do, it's always better if we can minimize the negatives we put out. In other words, go a little bigger and less frequently if we can, right? Just like in marketing, anything we have positive, we want to unbundle so we get all those positive stories out there. So to the extent I would say, look forward. Your procurement people should be talking to their suppliers, trying to understand where you are. Many companies will price on replenishment cost so that they can get a bit ahead of those. Sometimes we're surprised, but I would always say the more you know what's happening and can give a heads up to your customer base that these are the dynamics we're seeing, right? We might not know the exact, but we believe it's coming. We're getting wind that we're going to get hit yet more and more. Those can alleviate at least the need when we have to go fairly frequently. And once again, I go take this a little deeper. I go more frequently, perhaps on spot orders, people that not are standard customers, right? Move those costs along in a little bit quicker way. Those that are more in our base, you're going to have to look to try and maybe minimize those. If you have high metals that doubled overnight, you're going to have to go more frequently, right? There is that balance of fairness to you, fairness to others, and it will differ by industry.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think this is some industries have this question in spades, which is if we're communicating price increases due to raw materials, how do we avoid how do we avoid the communication trap when the index price of those raw materials goes down eventually?
Yeah, because I think everything needs to be done out of fairness. So if we've been like, oh, our raws are up, and then suddenly our raws are down, it might be eventually appropriate to give some back. But look at the bigger picture. Odds are your labor costs are never going to reverse back down, right? You might have one key raw material dropping, others may not be. What's really happening with logistics. So make sure you put it in context. And again, I go back to that 3 to 5 year sort of thing, because even right now I hear people go like, so inflation's down, so we have to give it back. Inflation, if we looked at where we are, it is still highest as it's been in 40 years. So it might not be as bad as it was just a few months ago, but it is still increasing, just at a slower rate. So make sure we put our answers or our fairness in response to kind of a multi-year picture before we easily just fall for, oh, you've got to give it back. Maybe you will, but maybe you're going to wait a number of months because it took you time, or maybe you're going to partially give it back because you have other rationale that says, yes, I get that that's gone down, but these things are going up. We have had this margin decline where we have not moved our price effectively for years. We need to, keep it that healthy level.
I think that's exactly right. And then another question I think is just right on the heels of that is, could you just expand on some ways to clearly communicate pricing? So there's the art of communicating that. Any tips for the audience?
Yeah, do it. That's the biggest tip. Do it. Right? Now, many of us might do customer letters, and that can be a very effective way if we're like clear in what we're doing, what percent we're going up, if you will, and why. Now, becomes even better when we put that into a context of perhaps a public notice, maybe articles in our industry magazines on what's happening with market dynamics. But even as we go into recessionary times where maybe we aren't able to increase price, maybe we're in the hold to slow the decline, we still want to communicate. And in writing is always, always, always the more effective way to communicate than just verbally. In a recessionary time, I might put out like a monthly newsletter, a single one page that's talking about the industry from our perspective. And we might be talking about what's happening as we see it in supply demand, we might even talk about working some subtle messages on cost and inflationary things, if they are to our advantage. We'll probably put in, and here's, by the way, some of the innovations we're doing for you, or some other key things, so that the letter is of some value for them to read, but getting subtle messages in that are the underlying rationale of what our price strategy would be. And of course, talking points in writing to your salespeople, updated periodically as the world changes, so that at minimum, they're able to verbalize very clearly and confidently your strategy.
Great. Yeah, context is key. Makes sense. We got quite a few questions, and hopefully we'll be able to get through all of them. But if not, we'll do our best to follow up after the webinar. So this one is on the importance of setting the right price and modifying strategy as market changes. But who in the organization does that? What functional role, what persona is that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, every company is a little bit different. Some people have high-level pricing managers that can kind of lead that and bring in marketing. Marketing, 4 P's of marketing, they own one of the P's, price. Unfortunately, I see too many marketing people think, oh, I only do the new product pricing. I only do the how much premium do we get? Well, somebody's got to be thinking more the strategic industry level price. Should the whole market be moving up as well as our value component? So some people, it's product management. Whatever is appropriate with your organization, just be clear on who it is. And I always say, if you're going to get your best strategy, I love to see it have input from sales who are working the ground and from the product management, the marketing. So it's when we bring the strengths of those together that we end up with our best strategy. Right? Because sales, they're going to be a little more pessimistic because every day they're getting hit with the price pressure. They're going to see things more tactically, deal by deal. And sometimes marketing or other leadership are a little bit more removed from that market, so they can sit back and look more rationally, but don't quite have really an understanding of the pressures that are happening. Together, that input allows your leadership team to make the smartest move, I think.
Great. So I think another good one would be in terms of, I think that's a couple questions on this, I think if I remember Econ 101, the stagflation scenario. So it is possible, the economy might experience a large demand drop and inflation might still persist. And correct me if I'm wrong, that I think that's stagflation. I got another question on that. And if that's the case, what do we do? Yeah,
and that is, I believe, more likely to happen, right? The Fed rates going up are actually there to tampen down demand. So some of us will see demand start to fall, right? But it'll be a catch-up game before that falls enough that the inflation doesn't have the power. It stops flowing. So I expect early stages, you're going to see costs coming in that you have not fully covered while demand starts to slide. More difficult. You don't have quite as much power. The supplier has some power and they have some more tactics they can threaten you with. I would go back to what we said in that workshop. Look at the pluses and minuses of all your costs compared to the supply demand, your competitive dynamics. Do some of those price volume trade-off scenarios, worst case, best case, so that you can come up with what is really an appropriate position. And then make sure you are all skilled so that you influence the broader marketplace in the most positive of ways.
Great. And I think we have time for one more, if that's okay. I know you've gotten through a lot of these, so thank you so much for taking the time. And I think this is a good one to close on. So when markets turn downwards and there's price increases that may not be justified, companies may be focusing more on cost cutting. Do you have any advice for how to tackle this?
Yeah, and it can be somewhat short-sighted, right? Suddenly, because the total profit of your company is down, because the total market is down, they start cutting cost. And really, I go back to saying pricing by far is your largest knob at profit. You think about if you just prematurely, unintentionally lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% price, you are going to, that's going to be the same for some of you as losing 10, 20, 30, maybe 40% volume, right? And this recession probably, thinking maybe more 5% market down, give or take, depending on your industry. It's not that. Your pricing is such a huge knob. And again, from chaos theory, I would say, if you're not out proactively, if you don't have the skills in-house, guaranteed, you will see, you won't maybe recognize it. You will have driven your price and your market price lower than it need be. So if profit's what's really driving you, boy, I would look for some of those low-cost ways to really make a fast bang for the buck so that you hold that price as long as possible. Guys, I would literally quantify what is a 5% decline in price. Look at the magnitude of that profit as you talk to your leadership to say, do you want to risk this? Right? Can we put this little investment in versus here's what could potentially happen? And maybe use that. I'm getting off track here, but clearly leaders that go through a recession when demand is down and think they can make up that profit loss by buying share, by lowering your price to try and take share from your competitors who are also struggling and are going to really hold on to that share, is a recipe for a price war and absolute guaranteed profit loss for you and your industry.
Mm-hmm. Yep, avoid the race to the bottom at all costs. So I think plenty of great takeaways for everyone. I hope the audience got as much out of that as we all did. So thank you so much, Joanne, for taking the time to share your thoughts with us. In lieu of the demo, apologies for the technical difficulties. I just threw together quick slides on leverage point. I know we have some new people that might not be as familiar with us. So really quickly on what leverage point does is we take all the pricing strategies, the value-based pricing strategies that Joanne just talked about, and help B2B companies model their value drivers, model their the economic impact of their features, benefits, and then get them into the arms of sales to help maintain value-based prices. So how does that work? First, business teams collaborate, product marketing, pricing teams to build custom value propositions that help sales tell a story. You put it into a cloud-based library that's accessible by every rep in your organization. And then finally, every sales team can access an interactive presentation based on these quantified value drivers that allow customers and prospects in real time to modify their data in order to create a unique business case to buy that the prospect can leverage internally to drive the deal forward. So throughout the sales process, our value propositions are used from the earliest stage to the end. So they're used to build sales confidence as flexible case studies and qualifying opportunities, engaging customers. When you get to the middle of the sales process, our value propositions are an important consultative selling tool for pre-sales. And then when you get to the purchase stage, as I mentioned before, you've collaborated on what becomes a shared business case to buy that creates an buyer's internal financial justification to purchase and a big asset for sales in a price negotiation. So our customers tend to see 5 to 15% higher close rates. They see 5 to 25% higher prices, 50 to 75% reduced sales cycles using our cloud platform. So if that's of interest to you and your team, feel free to check off the box in the exit survey and we can be in touch and schedule a custom demo for you. Finally, I encourage everyone to take the survey and pre-register for our next webinar. Thursday, March 9th, a lot of the same themes. Mark Stiving will be here from Impact Pricing, and he's going to be sharing lessons that that B2B enterprises can learn from SaaS pricing, whether or not you're on a subscription model or not. There's a lot of important lessons and innovations from the SaaS world that the broader B2B community can learn, and Mark will be sharing those secrets. So Thursday, March 9th will be our next webinar. Make sure you pre-register, and we hope to see you there. So want to give everyone a big thank you to both Lynn from ISBM and Joanne for her amazing presentation. And from all of us here at Leverage Point, have a great rest of your week. Take care.